Today, Brian and I are out near Dallas, Texas with the all-new third-generation Toyota Sequoia. They've made some pretty significant changes for this generation of their full-size SUV. The twin-turbo hybrid system is now standard, and towing capacity goes all the way up to 9,500 pounds. The Sequoia has always been related to the Tundra, but the relationship is even closer in this generation, where we have the same quarter panels, same hood, and even the same headlights as the Toyota half-ton truck. But the bumper and grille are definitely different. This gives me a lot more of a RAV4 vibe, which makes sense because this is an SUV, and they want the SUVs in the truck lineup to look a little bit different. This particular trim is the top-end capstone trim, so we get this much blingier grille here. I think this is my favorite grille design, and all versions of the Sequoia are going to have the blue accented Toyota logo because they're all hybrids. At the bottom of the grille, we have standard parking sensors and LED fog lights in this trim. Because the new Sequoia is essentially a Tundra up front, it looks more rugged and boxier than the previous generation, and I think more attractive as well. In fact, I think this is now the prettiest entry in the segment, especially in this top-end capstone trim. But it's not the biggest entry. At just over 208 inches long, this is 3 inches longer than the previous generation, but significantly shorter than a lot of the competition. And there is no long wheelbase version of this like we do find in the GM, Ford, and of course the Jeep competition. Ground clearance is going to range between 8.6 inches and 9.1 inches depending on the version that you get, and all models have a solid rear axle. That's an interesting twist in this generation of Sequoia when everybody else practically in the full-size segment is going to an independent rear suspension. That does have some compromises on the inside, which we're going to talk about in a bit. The square theme continues out back where we find full LED taillights and one of my favorite features in an SUV, rear glass that opens separately from the hatch itself. Now the hatch is powered, of course, the button is just there above the license plate, and we have a nice large opening. Standard in the Sequoia is the same hybrid system that we find optional in the Tundra. It's based around a 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6, closely related to what we find in the LS500 sedan. Under this hood, the combination of the turbo engine and the 48-horsepower electric motor give us 437 horsepower, 583 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to a traditional 10-speed automatic transmission, so no planetary hybrid power split CVT-like thing that we find in other hybrid versions of Toyota's products. As before, the Sequoia is rear-wheel drive by default, four-wheel drive is optional, and you can get a locking rear differential also. Unfortunately, at this point in time, I don't have official EPA scores, but if they are released by the time you see this video, then they're going to be right there on your screen. As you'd expect, the front seats are pretty similar to the Tundra because a large portion of this interior up front is shared directly with the pickup. We have a multi-way power driver's seat with 4-way adjustable lumbar support in this model, 2-position seat memory over there for the driver, and a powered tilt telescopic steering column, which is a really nice touch. Also, the front passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat, with the exception of this power extending thigh cushion, which is found only on the driver's side. The second row seat in the Sequoia no longer slides forward and backward. That's now the job of the third row. It still reclines, however, and has a pretty decent recline to it. The seats in here are definitely thickly upholstered, definitely bigger feeling than the ones that we find in the Highlander, but interesting twist, we actually have a hair less legroom between the first row and the second row than we find in the Highlander. Now the Sequoia is available as either an 8-seat or a 7-seat vehicle. It's going to be 2 seats up front, 2 or 3 seats here in the middle, and always 3 in the way back. There's a pretty significant driveline hump, just as you'd expect in a full-size SUV, but it is a little bit larger than the one that we find in the American competitors. The recline handle also works to fold and tumble forward the second row seats. That makes getting into the third row pretty easy, but this more traditional folding mechanism does mean that you cannot leave a child seat latch anchored into place and still easily access the third row. That could be a little tricky in the model with bench seats, but fortunately this version doesn't have a bulky center console, so it does make it easier to get back there to the third row. Jumping back into the third row, we find 119 inches of combined legroom back here. So with this second row seat in place, I have about 4 inches of legroom left. So absolutely not a problem on the legroom front. Versus the Toyota Highlander, this is a little bit more combined legroom, front row plus second row plus third row, but keep in mind again, front row plus second row alone, that's actually a little bit less than Highlander, so rear-facing child seats might be a little tricky there. Back here, the real problem is just headroom. We find less headroom in the third row than we find in the Highlander because this has the non-independent suspension, then there's the battery pack, then there's the third row seat back here. So if I am leaning forward like I am right now, my hair is touching the ceiling, and right about here where I might try and be comfortable, my head is touching the ceiling. If I wanted to go all the way back to the headrest, I basically have to crouch in here like that. And even Brian, how tall are you?
5'9".
And so Brian at 5'9", his head is touching the ceiling if he's all the way back in the seat. If he's slouching a little bit, then his head's not touching the ceiling. So definitely keep that in mind. The competition is going to give you 3 to 4 more inches of third row room. And also, this seat bottom cushion is pretty close to the floor. You can see my legs are way up in the air. Cargo capacity behind the third row will either be way below average or about average depending on the position of the third row, because this is the only model in the segment with a third row that slides forward and backward. And that does allow you to apportion legroom and cargo room a little bit differently than the competitors. Now, one interesting twist here is this multi-height load floor, which if we zoom in a little bit closer, it'll be obvious why we have this. The battery pack is located under the third row seats, so approximately in this area, essentially inside the cabin. We then have the sliding mechanism for the third row seats and the third row seats themselves. Because of these different levels, Toyota gives us a removable divider that can be put all the way down on the floor, but as you can see, now we have a little bit of a step up to that area. With the third row slid forward, you would pull this out, put it in its first little cutoff there. Now you have a cargo area that is level, so things like this 22-inch roller bag can fit in there and the hatch will close. If we power fold the third row, then you'll notice a little bit of a problem. The third row is going to be higher than this cargo level, which is why we have the next step up, which is also why we have these flip-up panels to help bridge the gap between this cargo divider and the third row seat back. Now we can slide cargo right there on top of the third row, and you have a small storage area below. You can then put the load floor in its highest height setting. In this position, we effectively have an upper tier of storage that's accessible when the glass is open. You can see in here, you can put purses, small backpacks, small items like that, and then you can flip up this panel to help keep items from falling between this storage area and the seat back of the third row. The interior is significantly more premium than the previous generation Sequoia. All models are going to have at least a standard sunroof. This model has the available large dual-pane moonroof. The third row and second row passengers get well-integrated sunshades, and this top-end capstone has a two-tone interior, which I really find attractive. Not too much bolstering on the front seat backs, but the first and second row seats are both heated and ventilated. The two-tone theme continues on all four doors. We find soft-touch plastics on the upper section, harder plastics lower, and real wood trim on this top-end capstone model. Over on the dashboard, we have soft touch materials for the center portion of the dashboard, real wood trim. It's hard to see, but the capstone logo is illuminated at nighttime right there inside that little chrome strip with the black accent in the middle. And then we do have harder plastics on the top of the dashboard, which surprised me a little bit because it's a little bit out of place compared with the driver's side experience over here, where we have soft touch stitch materials on the upper section and mid section of the dashboard both. In the middle of everything, we have the latest Toyota connected infotainment system with a huge screen. This is one of the biggest implementations of CarPlay or Android Auto that you've ever seen. If you move over to the Toyota interface, this is the same one that we find in a wide variety of products, especially, of course, the new Tundra. One important consideration with this infotainment system is that it doesn't support much in the way of offline maps, and the navigation system is connected only, so there's no online standard database. That means that outside the trial subscription, the system is going to stop functioning, and if you don't have good cell coverage, the map functionality will be severely limited as well. Below that, we have the controls for the tri-zone climate control, 3 automatic zones, heated and ventilated front seats. Below that button bank, there's another one with features like the 360-degree camera system, option to raise and lower the available air suspension. That's a rear axle air suspension only. Electric parking brake over here, pretty traditional console shifter, the drive mode controls, and the controls for the 4-wheel drive system. 2 really big cup holders over there on that side. There's a lid to close them off. We then have the center console, basically the same one that we find in the Tundra, wood trim panel right there, small storage cubby, and then this opens to reveal a very large storage compartment. On the driver's side, there's a windshield projected full-color heads-up display, and then below that, we have a full-color LCD instrument cluster. The theme of the display does change a little bit based on the drive mode that you're in, so for instance, if I go over here to comfort mode, the color scheme of the central dial changes, but the rest of the options remain pretty much the same. The steering wheel is the same 4-spoke design that we find in the Tundra. We have sport grips up top, no paddle shifters on the back. I would love to see some of those here. We have the controls for the infotainment system over here on the left side, volume up, down, and then track forward, backward on the right side. Adaptive cruise control controls over here, and then controls for that multifunction LCD back over there on the left. In case you're wondering, there is an integrated trailer brake controller. It's right over here to the right side of the steering column, just below the blue power button. Out on the road, the 2 things you're going to notice right away are this very smooth drivetrain. There's plenty of power going on. 0 to 60 out here in just about 90-degree weather came in just under 7 seconds. The other thing you're going to notice is that this does not have an independent rear suspension in the back like the previous generation Sequoia did, or most of the competition does at the moment. And it really is noticeable in the ride quality and the handling ability of the vehicle, especially out on a rougher road surface like I'm on here. So, Brian, you're way back there in the third row. How are things back there?
Well, the main takeaway that I've gotten so far is you definitely feel like you're sitting on the seat back here instead of in the seat because the floor is high. You can tell you're sitting on top of a live rear axle. You can really tell where I'm sitting is really a lot higher up than where Alex is currently sitting. So you definitely feel like you're at a higher center of gravity, and therefore those body movements are pretty noticeable. Another thing I'm noticing is because that acoustic laminated glass stops up there, I'm hearing a lot more of the exhaust back here. It's just a little bit less accommodating, but obviously it's a third row seat. You're not going to be back here all the time, and passengers are probably not going to complain too much unless they're bigger than me and they're going to be back here for extended periods of time because the floor is high, my knees are high, like we said earlier. It's a mixed bag, I would say.
And this model does have the adaptive dampers, which are optional, and the rear air suspension, but the ride quality back there, it's definitely firmer than the competition.
Yeah, we're definitely not on the smoothest pavement right now, but I will say you can definitely tell that it's not as smooth over those really deep bumps and potholes back here, even as compared to sitting up there in the front like Alex is.
You'll certainly notice on a winding road that the rear suspension can get a little more unsettled than the competition, especially the GM, the Ford, and the Jeep competition, because all of those have independent rear suspensions. As far as ride quality goes, the best ride quality is going to be found in the GM vehicles with their Magna Ride and Airlift combo, or the four-corner air suspension that we find in the Wagoneer. Also, I think handling ability is going to be a little bit higher in some of those competitors, possibly because of the tire choice that Toyota has made for the Sequoia. You'll definitely notice that in corners, this gives up grip just a little bit sooner than some of the competition. The defining feature of the Sequoia is, of course, the standard hybrid drivetrain, but this hybrid system is very different than the hybrid system that we find in the RAV4 or the Highlander in terms of design and in terms of feel out on the road. It has that traditional 10-speed automatic transmission, so if I floor it, we're going to get very definite, crisp gear shifts, and it's going to shift just like a regular truck would. But because the electric motor is between the engine and transmission as we're slowing down, the transmission has to downshift in order to regenerate power back into the battery, and that is going to be very, very noticeable. In a lot of braking situations, as it's downshifting, it actually kind of feels like you have a trailer on the back and the trailer is pushing on the hitch a little bit. You're gonna get sort of a bump, bump, bump as it's downshifting. The main benefit for this hybrid system is not gonna be found on the open highway, but rather in slow and go traffic and stop and go traffic, where this can spend a larger portion of its time with the engine off. Over a day of mainly highway driving and speeds around 70 to 72 miles an hour, we've been averaging about 20 mpg out of this hybrid system. You're likely going to find better steady-state highway fuel economy in something like the Tahoe or the Yukon, but only if you get the turbo diesel engine. And keep in mind that diesel is more expensive. On the other hand, you're likely to get very similar fuel economy in something like a Tahoe with the 5.3-liter V8, as long as you're treating the accelerator pedal gently and you're not doing a lot of stop and go or slow and go driving. That's again really where this hybrid system is going to shine. Say 20-25 miles an hour, it's definitely going to keep the engine off most of the time, but even right now at 45 miles an hour as we're coming into this curve here, the engine has already turned off and is just regenerating power back into the battery. But if I push on the accelerator pedal even more than just about a centimeter or so, it's going to turn on the engine if I wanted to go up, say, to 45 or 48 miles an hour. One last thing that surprised me, Toyota did not choose to swap in a full-time four-wheel drive system. This is a part-time system only. 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low. And you should never use 4 high or 4 low out on regular paved surfaces. The majority of the competitors have available full-time four-wheel drive systems that are definitely going to make the vehicles feel more sure-footed out on paved surfaces like this, or even on gravel road surfaces. If you're on a gravel road surface, you might forget to turn off the 4 high system, and then you could actually end up damaging the vehicle if you then end up on a paved road surface with it enabled, or you're going to impact the handling ability of the vehicle. You don't want to engage 4 high in this kind of system unless you're actively getting wheel slip. This is not the kind of system to engage, for instance, on a winding road in the rain. The most likely reason that Toyota chose a part-time system in the Sequoia is that this is going to be a little bit less expensive and maintenance costs are likely going to be lower. Now to the nitty-gritty. The Sequoia is going to be more expensive than the last generation and more expensive than some of the competition. When this rolls onto dealer lots sometime in the fall of 2022, the base model is going to be $58,300 for rear-wheel drive, $61,300 if you want four-wheel drive. Now, according to Toyota, the most popular versions are going to be the Limited trim and the Platinum trim. Limited is going to give you the imitation leather interior. Platinum is going to be the first model with real leather. And hold on to your hats because that is going to be quite a bit more expensive. Limited trim, $64,700 starting. Platinum with the real leather, $70,900. And this capstone trim, this is the most expensive way to buy your Sequoia. This one started at $78,300. It has a few options on it, which they haven't told me how much those will cost, meaning this one's probably over $80,000 as equipped.
And now it's time to play our new game called Is It Worth It? Would You Buy It? Starting with the Chevy Tahoe, this costs $8,000 more. Would you take this over the Tahoe?
Yeah, I think this is better than the Chevy Tahoe. I do like the interior better. I think the design language is a little bit more cohesive, and I love the exterior look. The 5.3-liter V8 in that Tahoe is a lot less powerful. Keep in mind, this does have the twin-turbo 6 standard fuel economy. However, honestly, that 5.3 in the Tahoe is really efficient, and you can get the turbo diesel, but not for that price. So is it worth it? I would say maybe. And would I buy it over the base Tahoe? Yes.
Gotcha. Moving on to the Ford Expedition. This is the standard length Expedition. This still costs $6,000 more.
Yeah, and interesting twist, slightly better value compared against the Expedition, because the Expedition now starts as a 2-row full-size SUV, which is a little bit of a weird twist. No third row in that model. You have to step up to the next trim to get the third row. I like the interior a lot better than the Expedition. The Expedition is really feeling old on the inside, and even though it has been refreshed, it's still not the most up-to-date and current look. So I think I like this better than that. It also tows a bit more, also than the Tahoe. So is it worth it? I think yes for this one.
Gotcha. Moving on to the oldest entry in the segment, the Nissan Armada. This costs $9,000 more.
Yeah, that is a tricky one. I actually think that the Armada is a screaming deal. The Armada manages to be a little bit roomier on the inside, especially in the third row. And I will say, if you are interested in third row accommodations, this is probably not going to be at the top of your list. In fact, this should be right down there at the bottom, because third row dimensions are actually right down there at the bottom. Legroom is good, headroom very, very limited, so keep that in mind. I would probably buy the Armada over this because that is a huge price difference. So is it worth it? No. Would I buy it over the Armada? No.
And last up, flipping the script a little bit, something that's a lot more expensive than this, the Jeep Wagoneer.
Yeah, the Wagoneer, its price tag is pretty hefty. The important thing to remember about the Wagoneer and its sister, the Grand Wagoneer, is that even in short wheelbase form, this is not their target. Although you can obviously get a Wagoneer similar priced to this very, very top-end capstone trim. Jeep is really trying to go after Escalade and Navigator with that model, not Sequoia or Tahoe or Expedition. Is it worth it? I would say yes, because the interior is significantly more premium in those top-end trims of the Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer. There are screens all over that interior, screens on the passenger side, screens in the back, etc. Is it worth it? I would say no, but would I buy it over this? If my pockets were deep enough, I would say yes. I love the 6.4-liter V8 that's optional, and now you're going to be able to get those new twin-turbo inline sixes, which should be pretty cool, but you're going to be spending quite a bit, tens of thousands of dollars more than this Sequoia. And of course, Sequoia has the reliability reputation that we've come to expect from Toyota. How reliable a Toyota twin-turbo hybrid system with a 10-speed automatic transmission will be, I don't know yet, but I would bet, if I were a betting man, that it's probably going to be the most reliable in the segment.
All right, that's the game.
If you haven't already done so, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, because I will have one of these at home just as soon as I can to run it through my usual barrage of comparisons and tests. In the meantime, if you're looking for an attractive and powerful 3-row SUV, the Sequoia should absolutely be on your shopping list. Really, the only downside that I can find for this model at the moment is the relatively interesting combination of class-leading third-row legroom and class-trailing third-row headroom. I'm not entirely sure who that customer is that wants that particular combination, but if you are a family of really long-legged people with very short torsos, then this might be an excellent fit for you. I'll see all of you later.